Hello, today we're going to go through Chapter 5, which is on emotions and how it affects the way that we think, feel, and communicate. So we'll start out with the first term that's important to be aware of, that is emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is defined as the ability to understand and manage one's own emotions and to be sensitive to other people's feelings. So if you think of an EQ similar to an IQ, research will say that you need to have the same amount of development and effort in order to get it to an appropriate level and be able to be successful in the world. So just like you put a lot of effort into your IQ, you should be learning and putting a lot of information and effort into developing your EQ as well. But as a stereotype, males don't get the same type of encouragement to develop a very advanced EQ. Females are encouraged to share and express their emotions, to be able to process multiple emotions with people who are around them. We've studied connection, and we know that a female-female connection in communication tends to use the most emotional empathy and cognitive skills related to emotion, and by contrast, a male-male companion or conversation would have the least amount of emotional sharing going on, or development or cognition skills related to that. So this is an important chapter to take seriously. There's an assignment that you'll have to do for me where you take an emotional intelligence and EQ quiz. It costs $10 to get the full results, but you'll get a synopsis at the end for free. It'll take you about 20 minutes at least to complete the test. And I would encourage you, if you have $10 to spare, to actually buy the full results, because what it will tell you is it'll break down your emotional intelligence into the different areas where you're sufficient or you're excelling, as well as the areas where perhaps you could use some more attention. And it gives you additional helps specific to where your deficits and your strengths are. So I bought the tests. I've been aware of my own emotional intelligence for years, and I still found that it was very useful and impactful to me to learn about the way that I've been processing my own emotions, what that means about me, and how I can improve. So with that said, let me move on and just finish out a little bit more definition work. Researchers have shown that your EQ, or your emotional intelligence, is positively linked with self-esteem, life satisfaction, and self-acceptance, as well as with healthy conflict management and relationships. So we've studied emotional intelligence with parents and found that parents who coach and develop the most EQ with their children tend to see benefits with them that produce the most healthy and adjusted adults. So these adults tend to report happier job satisfaction, life skills, relationships. It affects all aspects of their life. So, and EQ is a worthy goal to pursue. So next, let's just talk about some basic definitions with emotion. Emotions have physiological factors and nonverbal reactions that are associated with them, and these are just the overall effects on the body, so what your body is producing. So these are the biological processes and behaviors. It can be expressed through your gestures, such as blushing, sweating, or shouting. And these nonverbal reactions can actually cause your emotions. So we've studied this, and surprisingly, you would think that your emotions are what makes your body feel and respond the way that it does. But researchers such as Paul Ekman have found the opposite to be true, that actually the way that your body expresses emotion is what flags it in the brain for those emotions to be expressed. So he's done research where they've put different devices on people's heads and had them go to a specific emotion. So like they will make their face contort in a certain way for anger, for example, and their fists clench and their body language get tight to the point of an angry posture. And they've watched the brain, and the part of the brain responsible for anger will light up after those physiological body responses were made. And this is actually a breakthrough for multiple types of therapy, new therapy that should be developed, where we are learning that you can actually control your emotions by controlling your body and your face in particular. Paul Ekman's research primarily dealt with face, and there's over 10,000 different muscle combinations that create different emotional responses in the brain. So if we can learn to control and contort our face and trigger those muscles, then what it does is it triggers it in our brain to actually feel those responses. If you've ever done meditation or yoga, you know the principle behind this. And even in different types of behavioral cognitive therapy, they'll tell you that like the lungs are the remote control for your brain. So as you're breathing, your brain will respond according to that breath. And that's kind of what the research is pointing out. So we know that these physiological factors and nonverbal reactions do affect the way that we express and communicate our emotions. And they may even be the cause of our emotions rather than the other way around. In addition, there are cognitive and thought interpretations that we put onto those physiological and nonverbal reactions. So this is how we interpret what our body is telling us. And it's important to remember right from the start that this can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because you think you're scared, you will become scared. Because you think that you're heartbroken, you will experience heartbroken emotions. So thoughts can create our feelings. Our emotions, though, are completely non-biased. Our emotions and what's produced in our brain just happen. It's the thought and the attachment of meaning that we put to those different emotions that create what our interpretations will make into our reality. So, and then the third is your verbal expression. So how you verbalize and express your emotions are going to affect the way that you feel about it. So it'll affect the degree, it'll affect the interpretation, and it can actually change that emotion. So believe it or not, you could be feeling pretty anxious and nervous, for example, going into a public speaking engagement, and instead of letting those nerves that you're feeling in your stomach and your brain be interpreted as nerves and that you think that you're going to completely fail and be afraid of being out in front of public, you can take those same emotions that are being expressed in your body and interpret them and speak about them in a way that says, oh, I'm excited to present. I'm going to do a great job, and I'm going to channel this that I'm feeling and make it into energy that becomes positive for my audience.
When we hear the word emotion, most of us think of love, hate, happiness, or fear. Those strong feelings we experience throughout life. Our emotions are the driving force behind many of our behaviors, helpful and unhelpful. Just where do our emotions come from? Our brain is wired to look for threats or rewards. If one is detected, the feeling region of the brain alerts us through the release of chemical messages. Emotions are the effect of these chemical messages traveling from our brain through the body. When our brain detects a potential threat, our brain releases the stress hormones adrenaline and cortisol, which prepare us for a fight or flight response. When we detect or experience something rewarding, such as someone doing something nice for you, our brain releases dopamine, oxytocin, or serotonin. These are the chemicals that make us feel good and motivate us to continue on the task or behavior. In these instances, the feeling region of the brain kicks in before the thinking part. Sometimes the reactions of the feeling brain are so strong that it dominates our behaviors and we're unable to think rationally in the moment. Our emotions hijack our brain. While many of our emotional responses happen subconsciously, our thinking can influence our emotions, and sometimes this can be unhelpful. Just thinking about something threatening can trigger an emotional response. This is where we can manage our emotions with conscious thinking. Our emotions play a powerful role in the way we experience the world. Understanding and regulating our emotions through our thoughts and behaviors can help us take greater control of our brain and achieve our goals.
So what that video that you just watched helped to explain is that there's three main different parts of the brain that are processing emotions. We have our brain stem, or our hindbrain area, which is also known as your reptilian brain, and that's responsible for the knee-jerk reactions that you might get in a different stressful situation, such as somebody jumps up from behind you and scares you. Your body's going to automatically jerk to respond. And then there's the midbrain, or the limbic system, which is also known as your emotional brain, and that's what produces the different hormones like the video talked about. Basically your stress or your love hormones, depending on how you're responding. And then there's the neocortex, which is the forebrain or the thinking brain. So as your midbrain produces these different hormones, your forebrain allows that circuiting to attach meaning. So if you're feeling anxious or like a stress hormone like adrenaline, for example, your forebrain or your thinking brain can be what transfers different meanings to that particular emotion. So it's what can tell you not to worry about something, or that to channel it instead of having it be something that's hurtful or harmful to you, something that is exciting and helpful. I've read a study about this very thing, and they said that in therapy, if people can learn to attach different meanings to the emotions that they're feeling, it can actually be better than trying to suppress those emotions that are being produced in the midbrain altogether. So for example, somebody that's feeling a lot of stress, instead of telling them, don't be stressed about giving your first public speech, tell them that stress that you're feeling is actually good. It's helping you. It's going to make you do better. It's going to be producing excited and beneficial results. And by attaching positive thinking to the emotions that we're feeling, we can have a more positive result instead of a negative result. As we all know, stress is one of the number one heart and body killers that there is. So being able to process our stress correctly and positively is an important thing to develop for emotional EQ. So we know that overall, and you should have gotten from that video, we are feeling creatures who think. Instead of we're thinking creatures who feel, we are feeling creatures who think. And that means that because our mind is going to produce the response and then produce it in our body, and then our brain has to process those thoughts to tell us what it means, we feel first and we think second. So again, your physiological factors, nonverbal reactions, cognitive interpretations, and verbal expressions are all part of what makes us create those feelings and emotions into legitimate thoughts that then drive us to behave certain ways. Most of our experiences from different emotions are coming from the label that we give that physical symptom at any given time. So one physical symptom might mean something different to you in one scenario than it does in another. And here's a good example. If you were to go and have your first kiss with somebody that you really like, chances are before you go to kiss that person, your hands will start to go numb, your stomach might churn, you may even find yourself sweating or shaking. Those same physiological and body responses would be what I would expect you to feel as well if somebody was to approach you and you were feeling threatened by them. You were feeling like they're going to attack me, or something's about to go down. So it really has a lot to do with the thought process that we attach to what our body is responding. The term in your book to think about with this is reappraisal. So reappraisal is what gives us the ability to revisit the different emotions that we had and reattach different types of meaning to it. Or we can, even in the moment as we are starting to feel certain things, we can reappraise those feelings and attach different meanings to it. So in your book, they give an example. Here's one of the two. They say that, for example, your self-esteem has been shattered since you lost your job, particularly because some of your less ambitious coworkers who were not fired. You lack confidence as you look for new employment. So that's something that potentially shattered your world, and you are feeling like pretty depressed about it. So what you could do is reappraise the event as an opportunity to find a new position or a career where your hard work and contributions will be better appreciated. So you take those feelings of despair and despondency and instead turn it into a situation of, but now it's an opportunity. It's something that's going to make my life better overall, and use it as a turning point in your life instead of something that was negative. So here's another example. A friend of yours says some malicious things about you behind your back. Although you are hurt, you decide his actions are a statement about his character, not yours, and that you'll demonstrate your character by not speaking poorly about him to others. So I talk to my own kids about this all the time. When they field negative things from other people, and say hurtful things, instead of taking that and those comments and internalizing them, they have the choice of letting it stick or not. And if you're going to let go of things that hurt you or change the way that it's attaching to you, that takes particular thought processing. You really have to directly combat it and come to terms with what it could mean instead of what your mind or your body wants you to believe. So, or what it's meaning right now. And that's what really gives us a lot of power with emotions, is our ability to attach the meaning that we want to have from the encounters, instead of just letting our brains or our bodies run wild with how we feel and how we're processing. And you might think that, sure, this is okay in mild situations, but when I'm really angry, then I have no response. There's no responsibility. I just have to respond according to that anger. And I've been angry before and know that anger is one of those emotions that is extremely difficult to control. But even in that situation of anger where you're becoming flooded, you do have control, if you'll take it, of your thinking brain. And if you've ever said something to somebody in anger or done something in anger that you regret, you know the danger of not taking control and just letting your brain run wild with whatever it wants to produce. And in those situations, and like we learned in the first chapter, you can never take back things that you say. So all communication events stick. You can say you're sorry, but you can't take back things. You can't just erase it. So learning how to control, even in those situations where you feel the least amount of control, is a worthy goal to pursue, even with those strong emotions. So now I want to just go through some of the negative effects on the body that are correlated with the stress hormones that you heard expressed in the video. So stress does definitely affect our body and is recognized as the #1 proxy killer disease today. The American Medical Association notes that stress is the basic cause of more than 60% of all human illnesses and diseases. So if you look at this chart, you can see that it's affecting headaches, dizziness, ADHD, anxiety disorders. It's affecting our teeth, our heart rate, stroke, heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, type 1 and 2. It's affecting our digestive disorders with our upset stomachs, abdominal pain, irritable bowel syndrome, and it's affecting our weight gain and obesity, which is tied to type 2 diabetes as well. You may not have known that it affects your sex drive, and you would be expected to have a decreased amount of sex drive when you are feeling very stressed out. So other things that it can be like overall entire body illnesses are insomnia, emotional and behavioral problems, immune system dysfunction, asthma, ulcers, lack of energy, depression, nervousness, paranoia, etc., etc., etc. And then also muscle tension, fibromyalgia, complex regional pain syndrome, and more. So I point this out because there is something that we know we can do, and what I've talked about through this entire segment is the power of your thinking brain to turn what your body is producing and those hormonal responses into positive things for us. That's the crux of emotional intelligence, being able to control your emotions and let them be positive forces for you instead of negative forces. This magazine article, they studied different Buddhist monks and put brain scans on them and looked at the different parts of their brain and found that the parts of the brain responsible for negative stress hormones and fear responses were smaller than the parts of the brain in these individuals responsible for contentment and happiness. So literally it rewired and reworked their brains so that they were capable of more happiness, peace, contentment, the things that we all search for in lives. And the parts of the brain that respond to anger and and temper, all of that were actually smaller, and they were better able to control those emotions even when they started up. So there's a lot that we can learn from meditation, and learning to control what people in yoga or meditation will call the monkey mind, which is that inner voice inside your head that just tends to chatter on and on. So there's a lot of research that you could do on that if it's something that's speaking to you now, and probably one of the best things you could do if you know you struggle with your emotional intelligence. And as if you would need any more to be convinced that you need to learn more about the benefits of meditation, here's another chart corresponding to that first stress chart that you saw. So if you will meditate, you will have lower blood pressure, and as it slows down your cardiovascular system, it's going to restore balanced function to the digestive system, aiding in the absorption of nutrients, which, as we know, is going to be beneficial for the entire body. It's going to relax the nervous system, relieve muscle tension, diminish intensity of headaches and migraines, relieve insomnia, free the mind from self-doubt and internal chatter, release fears, reduce anxiety, improve depression, and generate optimism, self-esteem, confidence, and motivation. All worthy pursuits for anyone to go after. So the next section that we will go through is on personality, culture, and gender. For personality, we know that there is a clear relationship between personality and the way that we experience and communicate our emotions. So, in example, if you consider extroverted people in comparison to introverted people, we know that extroverted people have a tendency to be more upbeat, optimistic, and enjoy social contact overall, and they will report more positive emotions than introverted people tend to do. So we know that people who tend to have anxious personalities or neurotic overall personalities are going to report more negative emotions than others that don't have that personality trait. And so we know for sure that the biology of the personality can definitely affect the way that we are feeling emotion. But we also know that personality is not what has to govern the way that we communicate or how we feel. So even people who may have a shy personality, for example, can learn to channel those emotions and create different sort of communication events, even if their personality would say otherwise. Second is culture, and we do know that people around the world are generally experiencing the same types of emotion, but they are looking at different events that are generating those emotions. So, for example, if you go back to the low versus the high context culture, low context culture are very direct and independent, and so they will value emotions that create intensity and have kind of this overall cheerfulness or positive effect value, so making themselves stand out a little bit more. Your book points out that the United States is known internationally as a culture of cheerfulness, and that United States citizens tend to say things like, "Wow, great, how wonderful, that's fantastic, it was great." And, the book says Americans sound just so damned cheerful all the time. And that does have to do with our individualistic and low context culture. If you look at a high context culture such as Asians or Hong Kong, Chinese sorts of values, they have a low arousal rate. And since they value overall harmony within the culture, making themselves stand out is not something that they would seek. So they will look to express emotions that relate to the position of the culture overall, and that would probably be something that's prizing harmony in their in groups and discouraging expression of both negative and positive emotions that set people apart. So that just coming from the culture that you are from can definitely impact the type of emotions or the type of events that you seek for emotional expression. And then third is gender. So even within a culture, the biological sex and gender roles will shape the ways that men and women experience and express their emotions. So biological sex is the best predictor to detect and interpret emotional expressions. And we know this, that women, as I mentioned at the beginning, are more attuned to emotions than men. Females were 10 to 15% more accurate in remembering emotions, and by and large express more emotions and have more emotional intelligence than males. females. And as I expressed in the beginning, this has a ton to do with culture and upbringing. So there is cultural stereotypes that go into how women express emotion and how we would expect men to express emotion. But I would encourage you all to remember too that we are individuals at the end of the day. And so, even though your gender may say something, you may have been brought up in an environment or situation where that definitely was not the case. So next, we're going to talk about how emotions are contagious. And there's a term that your book brings up regarding this. It's called emotional contagion. That means that the emotions that you experience will affect the people around you. And there's a greater likelihood that those people will feel and experience the same emotions that you're expressing. So this is with depression, sadness, anger. It's even with happiness and laughter. If you've ever felt happy and come home whistling and laughing, you may have noticed that other people respond the same way. Or if you've ever seen someone depressed and lonely and been around them long enough, you may have recognized some of those same emotions being expressed within yourself, even though you didn't have them to begin with. So let's watch this short video that explains emotional contagion.
Daddy's gonna make you laugh now. Ready? Yeah. Do it again.
So if you watched that video and didn't at least get a smile, I would be surprised. It's really hard not to have emotions rub off on other people, and this happens from babies on into adulthood. The way that we experience and are feeling different emotions does affect the way that other people experience and feel their own. So let's move on and learn a little bit more about how to express our emotions positively so that we can be a positive influence for the people around us. So we're going to move on to this section for guidelines for expressing emotions. The first thing that your book will point out you need to do is recognize your feelings. Become aware of what they are and be able to properly identify what that could mean. So instead of just letting those feelings that are being created in your body wash over you, recognize what it is, be aware of that different response, and identify the different meanings that it could be attached to. So my face is getting hot and I'm feeling flushed. This could mean that I'm excited. It could mean that I'm feeling a little bit embarrassed. It could mean that I'm disappointed, and have a vocabulary that expresses the different types of emotions that you could be feeling. The second is to recognize the difference between feeling, talking, and acting. And there is a difference between all of those things. Feeling is one thing, talking about it is another thing, and the way that you behave based on those feelings is a third. And they will all compound the type of emotions that you're feeling and the way that it's being expressed to other people. The third is to expand your emotional vocabulary. And there's a table, it's table number 5.1 on page 154 in your book. This is something that you should consider looking at. Read through the different types of human emotions and see if you have ever used words that express that type of emotion. You'll find that a lot of us just will, we will express emotions in general terms. So I was so mad, I was frustrated, I was anxious, and there's a lot of different variants to those types of emotions. So your book will bring up things like apathetic. Maybe that was what it was, or I was feeling foolish or forlorn. I was feeling exhausted. Perhaps something like I was insecure, intimidated, irritable. All of those could be things that we just blanket with frustrated, because that's a common term for a type of anger. So being able to have the right emotional vocabulary is important, and identifying it with single words and a description for what is happening to you and what you'd like to have happen to you does tend to produce better results overall. And then once you've expanded your emotional vocabulary and you can identify specific emotions, then start sharing multiple feelings. Instead of just saying one or two things for what you're feeling, go into the deeper layers for why. We usually find with insecurity, for example, that produces, there's feelings of loneliness associated with that, perhaps disappointment. There could be all sorts of different layers that go into the feelings that we have. So sharing multiple feelings is important. And then finally, consider when and where to express your feelings. Sometimes you need time to process. Sometimes the avenue that you're at isn't the appropriate place or time for you to express those emotions. So give yourself time and space and make sure that as you express them, they are accurate and they represent what you truly feel. And then accept responsibility for your feelings and be mindful of the communication channel overall. This goes with considering when and where to express your feelings. Sometimes it takes time for us to be able to express our emotions in a way that we know we can accept responsibility. If it's right after the event, it might be hard, but if you give yourself a little bit of time, chances are you'll be able to accept responsibility. And the communication channel is important to remember. So, sometimes email and a more lean message like instant messaging is better for you to express your emotions than in a face-to-face context, because there could be so many layers going into that emotional expression that it's hard for you to even understand what you're feeling, let alone get that across correctly to the other person in a way that you're not misunderstood by, especially when you're dealing with strong and intense emotions. So be mindful of the communication channel and the different options that you have for expressing these emotions so that you can get them delivered in the right way for the right impact. Before we leave expressing your emotions, I think it's important to have a side note about anger. Back in about the 70s and 80s, psychologists actually thought that if you expressed anger, it would diminish the intensity of those anger feelings. So there was a thing in therapy sessions where therapists were trained to give different people there for marriage therapy or family therapy plastic batons and encourage them to hit each other when they felt angry. And as you might guess, instead of that being a beneficial thing for the participants, it actually exacerbated the feelings of anger that they had and made it worse overall. And so they've studied anger and found that it responds a little bit differently than the other emotions. Instead of you feeling better because you expressed it, it intensifies and makes those feelings more exaggerated than what they would have been. So here's a quote to keep in mind with expressing anger. Not that you can't express anger, but as Aristotle stated, anyone can be angry. That is easy. But to be angry with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right person, and in the right way, this is not easy. So be careful with expressing anger and know that it is the one emotion that doesn't necessarily have positive effects attached to it. The other emotions, if you express them, it does tend to be a catharsis of sorts where it helps you be able to process because you express those different emotions. Anger can complicate things and make you feel things that you wouldn't have had you not expressed that anger emotion. So next, we're going to talk about benefits of expressing emotion overall. People who know how to constructively express their emotions are healthier than inexpressive people or overexpressive people. So learning how to do it to the right degree at the right time is really the goal with all emotional expression. And if you do that, you'll become what the book calls a high affection communicator, who is someone who can communicate in an honest and genuine way and have little baggage that they're holding and actually help to maintain and develop better relationships because you express those emotions. So there are benefits of expressing emotions positively. Something else that's important to recognize is that sometimes our emotions are going to lead to irrational thinking. And if that happens, it usually comes out into some sort of a fallacy of thought. Your book goes through several different fallacies. The first is the perfection fallacy. And a perfection fallacy is going to make you believe that it's possible for you to have done better or be perfect in some sort of a scenario. So I'm going to bring up the example that the book brings up here on a perfection fallacy. They'll say that, like, perhaps you are expected to be flawless, and you think that others think that you're flawless, and if you appear any other than that, then they're going to see you as being somehow phony. So it would take a lot of energy and effort to maintain an overall appearance of being perfect, and that will diminish your overall ability to have proper self-esteem as well as your ability to be honest and truthful. So the perfection fallacy is one that I see in a lot of students, and it's one that the quicker you can get that under control, the more happy you will be, because I do believe that it hampers happiness, because you can't have a positive self-esteem if you're struggling with a perfection fallacy. The second is the fallacy of approval. So this is based on the idea that it's not just desirable, but it's vital to get the approval of every person that you encounter. So if you have a fallacy of approval, you're probably some sort of an accommodator or avoider in your conflict resolution skills, and you will feel nervous in situations if you think that other people are mad at you. So you will apologize quickly. Even if other people are at fault, you'll feel embarrassed if you think that you behaved unnaturally and other people didn't approve of what you did. So when we base our approval on other people, this also hurts our ability to self-validate, which is really an important sort of emotional intelligence level to get to, where we know that we're okay with ourselves and what we do because it is us, not because other people approve of us. The third is the fallacy of shoulds, and this is when you think of the world in terms of what should happen. So the book brings up, there should be no rain on weekends. People ought to live forever. Money should grow on trees. We should be able to fly. And, things like this can end up being a torturing sort of scenario where it makes it hard to engage in the world as is and gives an easy out for the world that we would like it to be or that we would prefer that it is. So in all those cases, we're not really responding in an emotionally mature way, and we're not addressing things as they actually are. So it's unrealistic to insist that the world is any way other than what it is right now. The fourth is the overgeneralization fallacy, and this is where you believe something exists on because of a limited amount of information. So the examples that your book brings up, I'm so stupid I can't even figure out how to download music on my phone. That's one piece of evidence for a really large claim. Or some friend I am, I forgot my best friend's birthday, which you would assume makes you an awful friend. I'm the worst friend in the world. All of that becomes an overgeneralization. And it becomes something catastrophic of sorts where like everything becomes negative because of one small thing. It's not really examining evidence for the type of evidence that you have. You always, if you hear words like always or never, that's a really good cue that that person is probably struggling with an overgeneralization fallacy. So you never listen to me. You're always putting yourself first. That automatically puts you into an overgeneralization lens. The fifth is the fallacy of causation, and this is based on the irrational belief that emotions are caused by other people rather than by your own self-talk. So I wouldn't have felt this way had you not done this. That is the hallmark of a fallacy of causation. And if you've ever gone to therapy, you will hear your therapist say this for sure several times. Not one person or event causes another person's emotional reaction. We are responsible for our own thinking brain and the type of meaning that we put on the emotions that are produced in our midbrain. So not one person or event can cause another person's emotional reaction. We cause that ourselves. So the book brings up things like keeping quiet when another person's behavior is bothering you, pretending to be attentive to a speaker when you're already late for an appointment or feeling ill. All of these could create some sort of causation. So I would have done better, but I was late. I would have paid attention, but I had this other thing going on. I, could have listened to you better, but this prevented me from it. And it's kind of giving us an out. And it doesn't encourage us to really examine our own behavior and our own feelings in different situations, which is where growth really happens. So the sixth is the fallacy of helplessness, and this suggests that satisfaction in life is determined by forces beyond your control. So there's no way I can have this happen because of this. Your book says, like, I was born with a shy personality. I'd like to be more outgoing, but there's just nothing I can do about it. Or, I can't tell my boss that she's putting too many demands on me. If I do, I might lose my job. So even though you might be thinking that's kind of reasonable to be worried about this or that, when it stops you from being able to respond the way that you would like to respond, it's a fallacy of helplessness. So, I mean, you could see this even in just like high school sports. I would like my coach to be better, but if I say anything to him, he's going to make life worse for me. You know, that's a fallacy of helplessness. You're not really communicating and expressing things truthfully or honestly in that situation. Instead, you're letting this fear overcome you and become a fallacy of helplessness. I would do something, but I just can't. So it stops you from progressing. The last that your book brings up is the fallacy of catastrophic expectations. This is where we act on the assumption that if something bad can happen, it probably will. So the examples that your book brings up, if I apply for the job that I want, I probably won't be hired. If I tell them how I really feel, they'll probably laugh at me. If I speak in order to try to resolve a conflict, things will probably get even worse. And you can see that there's two things going on in the fallacy of catastrophic expectations. One, you're feeling pretty helpless in the situation, so it does have the helplessness fallacy tied to it. But second, not only can you not do something, but if you do something, it will make it worse. So when you start expecting something negative to happen, then what usually occurs is you get that self-fulfilling prophecy that we talked about in the last chapter. And because you think something negative is going to happen, something negative does happen, which reinforces the original behavior or feeling. So all of these fallacies are things that you want to avoid. And if you ever experience them yourself, or you see someone that you love who is going through and using these types of fallacies, you want to be able to identify them and then educate them or yourself on what it is that's creating that fallacy and what you can do to make it go away. So the next section is on how to manage difficult emotions. And your book is going to tell you right from the start that the best thing you can do when you have difficult emotions and you're trying to get through a fallacy of sorts is to first make a distinction between the facilitative and the debilitative emotions that are going on. So it's not about suppressing yourself and trying not to feel certain things anymore, or, just tell yourself that you're not stressed and you won't be stressed, that sort of thing. Instead, it's recognizing what's going on, what's creating that emotion, and is it a positive or a negative thing for you. So facilitative emotions are emotions that help you change and improve because you feel a certain way. Because you feel nervous, you can learn to channel those nerves into something positive. If you engage in debilitative emotions, this tends to have a stronger physiological response, so your body has responded stronger to it. And it also has more emotional memory dedicated to it. So it becomes this sort of big event that perhaps it didn't have to be, but the way that your body responded or the type of thinking that you put on it created it that way. And when we engage in debilitative emotions, we tend to have what's called rumination. Rumination is when you play things out over and over again in your head and you think again, what could I have said to make it better? Why did this happen? And every time you think about it again, it dedicates more emotional memory space to that event, which then ties more emotions to it. So just by revisiting it in a positive way instead of a negative way can actually lessen the experience overall and help keep it from becoming something or being something that is post-traumatic. The second thing your book will tell you to do is to use self-talk. So if you don't feel comfortable just talking to yourself, at least crack open a journal and start writing things down. It doesn't matter if you even keep them, but you need to read and see and hear really what is going on inside of your head if you ever expect to gain more emotional control over those thoughts and feelings. So your self-talk will interpret the events. It's going to help you determine the emotions that you're feeling. And again, be very careful as you use the self-talk to be aware of that rumination that might come up. And when you're just beating it again and again, that may not be useful for you. You might need to recognize that this is a rumination and I need to stop it so it doesn't get bigger, instead of just feeding the beast that continues to go on and on. So the next section is on minimizing the debilitative emotions. So we know if we can open up and use self-talk to have facilitative emotions, that's positive. If it starts going into debilitative emotions, we need to learn how to shut this down so that it doesn't make that emotional experience worse. So the first thing that your book brings up with this is to monitor your emotional reactions. And when things start to get overwhelming, that's when you need to back off. Notice when your heart starts to flutter or, the tears start to come, and don't push yourself more than what you're ready to go. So monitor your emotional reactions and keep things in a positive balance for yourself. You don't need to lay it all out there all at once. Short, small bursts can actually be more positive in the long run if you're working on a difficult situation. The second thing to do is to note the activating event. So as you go back and you're looking at what happened, look at the trigger point that created that emotional response, keeping in mind that no one thing or person or event can cause an entire emotional response. There's layers that go into us feeling the way that we do. But it is important to know what the activating event was so that you can go through and identify the different emotions that may have led to that activating event. So the third thing to do is to start in on your self-talk. So record it somehow. Either, audibly put it out there or write it down in a journal. And for this minimizing debilitative emotions section, your authors will actually suggest that you do journal, because if you do that, you can go and review it later and see how things have changed because of the work that you've done. If you don't have a recording of where you were, it's hard to see the progress. But if you'll record your self-talk, you can usually see how you've progressed. And then the fourth thing to do is, after you've talked about the things that are bothering you and noted the activating event and how your emotional reactions were feeding that, dispute what's irrational in those beliefs. So go through and check out what caused you to feel the way that you did, what's irrational about that, and what is rational. And record that. Record what you think could have been changed. Through is how to maximize facilitative emotions. We want to minimize debilitative emotions and maximize the facilitative emotions. And I wholeheartedly believe what this whole section has to present to you, which is basically the premise that if we will learn to savor our positive emotional experiences and focus on what we've gained instead of what we've lost, we're going to reduce stress overall. We're going to live in the now more. We're going to live with happiness and joy, which is what we all want to achieve at the end of the day. And the little things aren't going to matter as much. So if, like the book brings up, joy, gratitude, serenity, interest, hope, pride, amusement, inspiration, awe, and love, all of those are emotions that we seek, that we want to have so that we can have a rich and fulfilling life. Those emotions and those experiences do exist in our day-to-day life, perhaps in small doses, but they're there. And the human tendency is to focus on the negative emotions, on what we don't have instead of what we do have. And by paying attention to those negative emotions and disregarding the positive emotions, we're literally rewiring our bodies and our brains to pay attention to the negative and to only care about the negative, which is just going to reinforce feelings of dissatisfaction. Where if we'll take the time to stop and look at the beauty and the goodness and the kindness that happens in our everyday life, be it in small doses, we will train our mind and our body to produce those positive feelings of happiness, contentment, joy, gratitude, the things that we all seek and want in our life. So if you'll just take the time to identify and take advantage of those positive emotions when they come and let them be as big of a deal as you would let a negative emotion be, then you'll see the balance of emotions in your life switch, and positive, happy feelings can overtake negative and disruptive feelings. So thanks for watching, and I hope that you read this section really carefully. If this is speaking to you and you know there's more work that you need to be doing on your emotional intelligence, start by taking the quiz that I have as the assignment, and then do your research from there. Don't let this be a chapter in a book that you just see and participate in and then move on. This is your emotional intelligence. It's one of the most important things that you could do for yourself, for your family, and for your loved ones. So it's something that you should put a lot of time and effort into. Thanks.